In 1940, when America was still on the sidelines of the war, Hermann Göring dismissed their industry with contempt. As head of the Luftwaffe, he boasted endlessly about German air superiority, about the Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs that had dominated Europe's skies. To him, the United States was a nation of consumers, not warriors, people who built cars and refrigerators, not fighters and bombers. When word reached Berlin that President Roosevelt had promised to build 50,000 planes in a year, Göring laughed. 50,000 was fantasy. Even Germany, with all its might, could not produce such numbers. The Americans, he scoffed, can build only razor blades and automobiles. But arrogance has a way of writing its own downfall. As the war deepened, the reality of American industry began to reveal itself. The same factories that once rolled out Fords and Chevrolets were retooled into endless streams of aircraft. Assembly lines that had produced washing machines now churned out engines. Women filled the factories, riveters and welders working day and night, while farmers' sons traded plows for flight training. The United States became not only an arsenal of democracy, but an engine that dwarfed anything Göring could imagine. I remember hearing the first rumors in 1942. American bombers were appearing in greater numbers, flying deeper into Europe. At first, our commanders insisted it was an exaggeration. But by 1943, the skies told the truth. Streams of flying fortresses stretched from horizon to horizon, hundreds at a time, then thousands. Our fighters rose to meet them, but for every bomber we brought down, another seemed to take its place, and above them flew the fighters, Thunderbolts, Mustangs, Lightnings, a swarm of protection that grew larger each month. It was then that we began to realize the scale of America's promise. Göring had laughed at 50,000 planes, but the Americans were not laughing. They were building. Their factories produced over 8,000 aircraft a month by 1944. In 1 year, they built more planes than Germany had produced in the entire war. They did not stop at 50,000. They pushed past 100,000, flooding the skies with steel and fire. For us, the shock was not only in the numbers, but in the ease with which they achieved them. Germany had pushed its industry to the brink, wringing every ounce of labor and material. Our factories were bombed, our workers exhausted, our supply lines strained. But America seemed untouched, its vast resources humming without pause. Oil, aluminum, steel, they had it all in abundance. While we rationed every drop, they poured rivers of it into production. I recall flying a sortie against American bombers in late 1943. The sky was thick with contrails, so many planes that it seemed the clouds themselves were engines. Our squadron attacked, diving into the formation, cannons blazing. We destroyed some, yes, but the losses we took were unbearable. I barely returned to base, my plane riddled with holes. As I climbed from the cockpit, an older pilot muttered, "For every one we kill, they send 10 more." His words proved true. The psychological weight of those numbers crushed us. No matter how skilled we were, no matter how bravely we fought, the arithmetic was against us. Göring's laughter echoed in our minds, but it was hollow now, a bitter reminder of how badly he had misjudged our enemy. We were not fighting men alone. We were fighting an ocean of machines that never stopped coming. In the mess halls and barracks, pilots whispered of the American factories. We heard of Ford's Willow Run plant, where a bomber rolled off the line every hour. We heard of shipyards launching carriers faster than we could sink them. Some refused to believe it, clinging to the idea that such stories were exaggerations. But the evidence was above our heads, in every raid, in every sky filled with hundreds of planes. The truth could not be denied. For me, the realization came during a massive raid on Hamburg. We scrambled in waves, the sky filled with the thunder of engines. No matter how many bombers we downed, their formation remained unbroken. As the city below burned, I looked upward and understood. Göring's laughter had been our doom. He had mocked the Americans, and now their answer was written in fire across our skies. By 1944, the numbers were undeniable. At first, we told ourselves that America's aircraft were poorly built, that quantity meant nothing without quality. But those illusions burned away with every raid. Their bombers were sturdy, their fighters fast and lethal, and their production unstoppable. We watched helplessly as the skies transformed into rivers of silver, stretching across the horizon, endless. One morning over Schweinfurt, our squadron scrambled to intercept a wave of B-17s. There were so many that even our commanders admitted it was like attacking the sky itself. We dove again and again, cannons spitting, wings trembling under strain. Bombers fell, some in flames, some breaking apart mid-air, but for every one destroyed, 10 remained. Behind us, the Mustangs swooped in, their engines howling, guns blazing. By the time we limped back to base, a third of our unit was gone. The airfield was silent as men counted the missing. The arithmetic was merciless. They could afford losses. We could not. The stories spread through the Luftwaffe like a plague. In France, pilots reported bomber streams that blotted out the sun. In Italy, convoys of American planes seemed to arrive daily, never ending. Even in the east, whispers reached us. New airfields, new squadrons, always more. Göring's words, his laughter at Roosevelt's promise, now sounded like madness. 50,000 planes had been a fantasy, but one America had surpassed with ease. The psychological collapse was as devastating as the physical. We had once believed ourselves the masters of the sky. Now every sortie felt like suicide. New pilots, barely trained, were thrown into battle and died within days. I remember a boy, no older than 17, climbing into a Messerschmitt with wide eyes. He had flown perhaps 12 hours total. When the red tails met us that afternoon, he was gone in minutes, a smear of smoke across the clouds. For every boy we lost, the Americans had a trained replacement ready. Their pipeline was endless. Ours had run dry. The factories told the story more clearly than any battle. American industry had shifted into a machine of war, unlike anything the world had ever seen. At Willow Run, they produced B-24 Liberators with the efficiency of clockwork, 1 per hour, day and night. In Seattle, Boeing turned out B-17s in rivers. In California, fighters rolled off lines as if stamped from molds. Meanwhile, in Germany, our factories lay shattered under the very bombs those planes carried. Workers sifted through rubble, machine tools destroyed, assembly lines halted. What we built in a month, America built in a week. In the mess halls, the bitterness grew. Some cursed Göring outright, blaming his arrogance for underestimating the enemy. Others sat silent, staring at their hands, knowing there was no solution. The Reich had promised dominance. Instead, we were fighting ghosts of steel, more numerous than we could count, more durable than we could break. I remember standing on an airfield one evening as a raid thundered overhead. Hundreds of bombers, guarded by fighters, moved like an unstoppable tide. The sky glowed with their contrails. I thought of Göring then, his boastful speeches, his laughter when told of Roosevelt's plan. I wondered if he still laughed as the factories of Germany crumbled, as his Luftwaffe bled itself dry, as his pilots fell one by one. Perhaps he laughed still, but it was the laughter of a man cornered, desperate, hollow. By the autumn of 1944, even civilians could see the truth. American bombers flew daily, their drone constant. When I was finally shot down and captured in early 1945, I saw the truth with my own eyes. American airfields stretched for miles, rows of planes gleaming, engines humming, replacements waiting. There were so many that I stopped counting. The scale crushed me more than captivity itself. We had been beaten not just in the air, but in the factories, in the numbers, in the very belief that industry was as decisive as courage. Later, in captivity, when I heard the final tally, more than 100,000 planes produced, I thought of Göring again. He had laughed, yes, but in his laughter he had doomed us. For while he mocked, the Americans built. And in that building, they buried the Luftwaffe. By the beginning of 1945, the Luftwaffe was little more than a shadow of its former self. The squadrons that once terrorized Europe now flew in fragments, a handful of planes against armadas of American bombers and their escorts. Fuel was nearly gone, pilots were barely trained, and morale was broken. Yet the raids did not stop. Day after day, the sky thundered with engines. The Americans had surpassed every promise, every boast. Göring had once mocked the idea of 50,000 planes. Now they had built over 100,000, and the numbers showed above every city reduced to rubble. I remember one of the last sorties I flew. We rose from a battered airstrip, only 6 fighters left from what had once been a full squadron. Ahead of us, the horizon shimmered with silver. Hundreds of bombers, guarded by dozens of fighters, moved in perfect formation. The sight drained the fight from us before the battle even began. We climbed, we engaged, but we knew it was hopeless. I fired a few bursts, saw tracers streak harmlessly into the void, and then dove away, praying to survive. Around me, comrades fell one by one. When I landed, only 3 of us returned. The war in the air was over, though the ground still bled. What struck me most in those final months was the silence of Göring. Once, his voice had filled every hall, every rally, every radio broadcast. He had boasted of victory, of invincibility, of the Luftwaffe as a weapon no one could challenge. But by 1945, his words had dried. His promises had been broken by the reality above our heads. He had laughed at Roosevelt's pledge. He had scorned America's factories. And now, his Luftwaffe lay in ashes, his boasts turned to dust. We no longer believed him. We no longer believed in anything but survival. The collapse was not sudden but steady, like a building eaten from within. Each raid took more than lives. It took hope. Civilians huddled in shelters, their faces pale, their voices hollow. They knew that no one would stop the bombers. We, the pilots, were powerless to reassure them. We launched only because orders demanded it, not because victory was possible. Every mission was another walk into futility. When surrender finally came in May, I was both relieved and ashamed. Relieved that the endless roar of engines had ceased, that the rain of bombs had stopped. Ashamed because I knew we had been destroyed not only by courage or strategy, but by arrogance, by the laughter of a man who had underestimated an enemy with bottomless resources. Göring's words had been our poison. He had blinded us to reality, convinced us that America could not build what it promised. But America had not only built it had surpassed it. In captivity, I had time to think. I sat behind wire, watching Allied planes streak overhead, still countless, still gleaming. I realized then that wars are not won only on battlefields. They are won in factories, in assembly lines, in the determination of a people who can produce endlessly. Germany had courage, yes, but courage without resources is a candle in a storm. America had oceans of oil, mountains of Statham, eel, and millions of workers who never stopped. Against that, no boast could stand. Years later, when I told my children of the war, I did not speak only of battles, I spoke of numbers. I told them of how Göring laughed at the idea of 50,000 planes. I told them how America built 100,000 instead, and how those planes filled the sky until resistance became impossible. I told them that arrogance is more dangerous than any enemy, because it blinds you to the truth. Even now I can still hear the drone of engines, endless and heavy. I see the sky covered in contrails, weaving a net across Europe. I feel the futility of climbing into a cockpit knowing the battle was already lost. That was the legacy of Göring's laughter. It was not victory. It was the sound of hubris echoing into defeat. The war in the air ended long before Berlin fell. It ended the day America's factories proved their promise. We thought ourselves masters. Instead, we were overwhelmed by a storm of steel born from assembly lines we had mocked. That storm wrote the end of the Reich, one plane at a time, until there were 100,000 and more. And so, when I close my eyes, I do not remember Göring's boasts. I remember the skies, endless, crowded, silver with wings, and I know the truth. Our defeat was built not only in battle, but in the laughter that ignored reality. That laughter cost us everything.